Hello and welcome. My name is Nicole Tucker. I run all things marketing here at Atumos. Thank you guys so much for joining our webinar on nurture strategy. We have two great Marketo nerds on our team that love nurture, and they wanted to do this webinar for you, so you're in for a jam-packed session. Before I let them introduce themselves, a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. We will send out the recording and the slides after the webinar today, so you can reference them in the future. The audience is muted for the duration of the webinar. However, if you have questions, please post them to the chat box in the GoToWebinar module. We'll answer those at the end of the webinar. We'll leave around 10 minutes for questions at the end. Finally, there is an exit survey at the end of the webinar. I would so appreciate it if you filled that out. It will only take about a minute of your time. It will help us tailor topics for future webinars from Atumos. With that, I will pass it over to Amanda to get us started.
Thanks, Nicole. It's Amanda Thomas. Quick intro about myself. I am a three-time Marketo champion. I'm based here in Houston and co-lead the Marketo user group down here. And I've been in Marketo for over 5 years and really developed a knack for nurture over that time. And I'm excited to present and share with you some of my findings. I'll pass it over to Sydney to introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Hi, my name's Sydney Mulligan. I'm a four-time Marketo champion, Marketo Fearless 50, Marketo Certified Solutions Architect. I'm based in New York, which you may be able to tell from the sirens you can potentially hear in my background. And I've been with Atumos for about 2 years now. Really excited to jump into nurture strategy with you guys today.
All right, awesome. We'll get started here. Okay, so first up, our agenda for this webinar, we broke it down into 3 simple steps for you to really enhance your nurture. Step 1, we'll cover the different ways to organize your nurtures and why evergreen content should be used. Step 2, I'll take you through configuring acceleration, streams, skip logic, to really optimize your personalization that you're going for within your nurture. And then step 3, I'll pass it over to Sydney, and she will expand on how you can scale your instance and lead process by using segmentations to fuel a traffic director program. All right, first up, nurture structure and evergreen content. So what we want to cover, just a quick overview of who to nurture, why you should use evergreen content, and then how to structure your nurture. So who to nurture, when first starting out with nurture, the end goal is really to get people over to your sales, to get them to interact with what you are providing to them, and to get that sales cycle started. So you first want to their SAL, buying profile or persona. So this can be related to job level or job function, geography, language, and company size, or maybe even industry. A pro tip here is to really start with a good look into who your customers are today. So how did they get to be customers? What kind of content did they interact with? What are some common traits around your customers? And kind of go from there when trying to define who to nurture. Okay, so every nurture should be using evergreen content. And evergreen content is posts, white papers, webinars on ideas that hardly change with the passing of time. These are always relevant, especially to new beginners. And you want to use evergreen content that's actually working already. So take a look at what evergreen content you have that is driving website traffic, social shares, leads, and is really increasing your search rankings or really providing a good contribution to your search rankings. With evergreen content, although the main ideas of this content isn't constantly changing, you should make sure you're always keeping it fresh. Make sure the layout has been updated, the design needs to be, just make sure it doesn't look like someone is reading something from 2005 off of your website. That's really not going to drive interactions with your content. Okay, so nurture structure, when to use a drip and when to use an engagement program. So really you want to use a drip campaign if there is a linear stream of emails to be sent to a static audience. You don't need to pull them out for any reason. You don't need the cadence of the emails to change. A lead should qualify more than once. You want people to kind of keep running through it. That's possible with drip. Use an engagement program if the content is evergreen, if you want to prevent leads from receiving content more than once, and if you have a complex requirements for moving leads through that program. Examples of when to use like an engagement program, good ones are nurturing your leads. So again, going off of who to nurture on a specific industry. Drip is for more stable things that are going to come one after the other. So if they just signed up for a new trial, those first 2 emails that need to go out to help them and guide them through logging into that trial, that could be used in a drip. Okay, so getting into building out acceleration and skip logic, we'll break this down into using default programs, configuring your skip campaigns, and then configuring your transition campaigns. And the whole purpose of implementing this is to make sure you're delivering the right content at the right time to increase the interaction your prospects are having with the content. So default programs, the big question, why should we use default programs and not just emails? Default programs give you the ability to test multiple email variants with random samples. They give you the ability to have different criteria to determine individual program success. And you can also switch out your emails, new template and all, without interrupting the flow of a stream. No one's going to be interrupted if you get a new template and you have to replace all your emails. Adding new emails takes even less time because you can have tokens live at the program level. And you can enable skip logic, which is most important, to create an even more personalized experience for your prospects. So in this chart, this is a really good visual of using default programs versus individual programs. And mainly on the right side, you can see that if you use a program, if the lead is already a member of this program, they will go back again up to that #1 step of the question. If they're not in the program, then the campaign will send. So this is what allows for the skip logic to work. So when building this out, you will have 1 default program per email. And basically you're breaking out each stream that you currently have or each first who to nurture audience that you defined. So if that is construction industry, you would have construction steady and construction accelerated. So breaking it out to have a steady stream and an accelerated stream. And then you will have a default program per email, and both of those streams will share each of those default programs. So it looks like this. For skip campaigns to work and really for you to be able to get the reporting that you want out of these, we recommend that you add an excluded status to your nurture channel tag. This again is to indicate that the person skipped over that email because they have already interacted with content that you're promoting within that email. You should run a batch campaign before implementing the trigger campaign that will exclude people. So I'm going to show you the smart list setup, the flow, and then I'm going to pop into our instance to actually demo it within the instance. So in setting up your skip campaign, the smart list will be anything you want to use to trigger and measure that an interaction has taken place with content you're promoting. So this could be visits webpage, this could be fills out form. You could have specific thresholds on how much time they're interacting with content on your website if you have third-party tools. And then our pro tip is not to use click, link, and email. There are a lot of spam bots and tools to actually mine your emails, open them, click the links, make sure nothing is spam that's coming into your inbox. And these do register in Marketo as clicks in your email. So just avoid that one and you should be good. Any other measurement of interaction is good to trigger off of for the skip campaign or the exclusion campaign. Right, yes, and then previously in this slide, this your batch is just going to be the same thing that you're using the trigger off of, just as a filter. So your flow step is to change your program status. Pretty simple. Your email nurture is now exclusion for the status. And I'm gonna pop out of here to demo how this looks inside of Marketo. Okay, so here we have our nurture program and our streams. Essentially. So you can see we have awareness, awareness accelerated, research, research accelerated. So it's basically breaking out each stream that you have into two, one study, one accelerated. And they're all calling off, these are calling off of the same programs here, which then contain emails to send. The exclusion batch will run when you're first setting this up to make sure that you're excluding anyone that's interacted with this content before you have gone live with this program. So the triggered exclusion, again, is just saying they visited the web page that we're promoting in the first CTA. You can absolutely implement more criteria saying they interacted with everything you're promoting within the email. We do recommend the first CTA because that is the most interacted piece within an email. So definitely start off with the first CTA, and if you want to get more specific, you absolutely can. It will change your program status, and that is it. That's how it's set up. So I'm going to pop back to show you how to transition in between accelerated and skip, or accelerated and steady. Here we go. All right, so your transition campaigns are running to send content to users who are actively interested in your brand, products or offerings. So go faster if they're interacting more, and go slower if they're not interacting. So we'll go through transition to accelerated, transition to steady. Your first default program of the steady stream will only have one transition campaign that goes to accelerated. This is because you want to put all of your members in the steady stream first, especially if you don't have any data on how they interacted with email in the past. You definitely don't have data with how they're interacting with this current email program because it's brand new. So start them off in steady, allow them to go to accelerated after that first email is sent, and then they can come back into steady. So transition from steady to accelerated, your smart list will contain that they are a member in this stream. So they're a member of the steady stream, and they were delivered the email within the past 6 days. And this is set up in regards that your steady stream is running, once a week. So they received an email in the past 6 days, and they've actually interacted with this main CTA in the past 24 hours. So we use the 24-hour time constraint here as this is going to run every night, and we want people to get put into the accelerated stream as soon as possible. That way, when the next cadence runs with that, because it runs more often than the once a week that the study stream runs, they get into it and they start receiving emails faster. The flow step is to change their stream. Pretty simple. Okay, so I'm going to pop out of here again and show you how this looks inside of Marketo. Actually, let me run through the transition back to study first, and then you can get a full picture when I pop in there. Okay, so transition from accelerated back to study, same thing. Their stream is accelerated. So they're just in that accelerated stream and you want to move them back to study. They were delivered the email in the past 6 days, and they have not interacted with that main CTA in the past 24 hours. There's no reason to be sending people emails at an aggressive pace if they're not interacting with these emails. So take them back to study, measure again how they're interacting with your content, and having the transition from study to accelerated will pull them over. So inside of each default program, besides the first one, you're going to have transition to accelerated and transition to study, so they can go back and forth. The last one probably don't really need to transition to accelerated or study because it's the last email in the stream, but it's good to have in place. So if you're adding more programs and more emails to your stream, you have that already there. And then the flow is switching them over to the study stream. So just awareness, non-awareness, accelerated. Okay, now I'm going to pop into demo this for you. So we're in the nurture program, and then within your campaigns, you'll have your add to nurture, pause, resumes, and then your transition. So transitioning to accelerated, you can see here your smart list is set up. And your flow, again, is just switching over the stream. Then transition to study. Your smart list is that they're in accelerated and they have not interacted with your main CTA. And you will switch them back to study. And that's it. That's how you implement it. I'm going to pass it over to Sydney here to get you started on advanced audience targeting.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Awesome. So after you've spent all this time and energy putting together your new nurture strategy, making sure that what you have is focused on your evergreen content, that you are there we go. That what you're sharing is your evergreen content, that you have all these accelerated streams built out. You probably have multiple nurture programs running, targeting your different audiences, as Amanda mentioned at the beginning, kind of identifying what those core audience breakdowns are for your business. You may be running into the situation where people are all over the place. You have so many nurtures running, you don't know, what portion of your database is not currently being addressed. How do I know that people aren't in too many nurtures at a time, particularly if they're a really key buying persona? It's easy to kind of punish those people for being a great fit customer for you by throwing them in too many nurtures at a time, and then they're hitting their communication limit super regularly. They're probably unsubscribing. So what we're going to talk about now is how to really handle that type of advanced audience targeting that you'll have grown into at that point. We'll do that using a centralized traffic director program. And after we go through setting that up and the benefits that it'll have for your instance using a segmentation, we'll also look at kind of taking your nurture one step further to do some additional advanced targeting, to kind of do a statistical proof of concept for your nurture, or prove that your nurture is effective, and as well as jumping into an example of how to do an A/B test inside one of those nurture cast programs. So we'll run through a couple of quick slides, but we'll probably spend most of our time together in Marketo because, let's be honest, everyone would rather look at Marketo than look at my slides, I'm sure. So as we mentioned, Traffic Director is a centralized operational program that's meant to route leads into the best fit engagement program as they are created. You can also reevaluate a lead's fitness for nurture as key attributes about them change. Our Traffic Director, for example, reevaluates a person for nurture if they opt in to receive nurture from our subscription center. You can also have them reevaluate if something like their job title changes, if sales has now updated that information, or if they fill out a form with progressive profiling and you have more information to target them now. Or if they engage with certain pieces of content that you're using to profile them into a specific category of nurture. One way you can do this is with topic of interest scoring. We can touch briefly on that when we jump into Marketo. The other benefit of having this kind of centralized Traffic Director program, so we talked about, we're making sure that leads are not in more than one engagement program at a time, that they're always in the best fit engagement program based on what we know about them at that time. The other thing is when a lead exhausts all of the content in the program that they're in now, instead of waiting for you or waiting for your demand gen team to submit more copy for more emails to be created, which we know everyone has the best intention of doing when they launch a nurture, it very frequently becomes deprioritized, falls to the wayside, and then you end up with hundreds or thousands of people that are kind of trapped, quote unquote, trapped in an engagement program, but not receiving any content. What Traffic Director can do is automatically detect that that person has exhausted all of their content, move them into the next best fit engagement program so they continue receiving content. And if you do get around to refreshing that nurture or adding more copy, you can always move them back up into their better fit nurture. So Traffic Director is the centralized operational program. Basically what it's doing is it's functioning as a static list manager. So it's adding persons to the static list of every single nurture that they are a good fit audience for. Regardless if they qualify for multiple, they can be in every one of these static lists if it makes sense. It wouldn't. It would be unlikely that someone would qualify for every single nurture in your database, but if they did, they would be able to be in all of those lists. And then what really controls Traffic Director, so we're kind of handing this off three ways. Traffic Director, the program, hands off to Traffic Director, the segmentation. So a segmentation is super valuable here. I feel like segmentations can kind of be the boogeyman of Marketo, that people either know they exist and are kind of afraid to use them, maybe have heard that you only get so many, so I don't really know when is a good time to use a segmentation and when is it a waste. You should absolutely be conscientious about what you build a segmentation for. Don't build a segmentation for things that you could really just use a smart list for. Segmentations do have a limit on how many you can have running at a given time in Marketo. I believe for most people, it's 20 or 25, and that's something that you can adjust with your CSM as part of your Marketo contract. But in general, I think it's about 20 to 25. And it's kind of annoying if you have a segmentation that you've built out and we decided that this actually wasn't very valuable, but we've been using it for years and years, and now we've hit our limit. You have to go unbuild every single reference to that segmentation, including in archived programs or things you're not using anymore, in order to deactivate it so it doesn't count against your limit. So certainly appropriate to be wary of using a segmentation. The reason that Traffic Director is a really good fit for a segmentation is because it gives you that ability to pass leads back and forth between nurtures as their qualification changes or as they run out of content. So we'll jump into the segmentation itself and what it looks like in Marketo, but at a high level here, the top priority segments, and as you know, if you're not familiar with segmentation in Marketo, the main difference between a segmentation and just a smart list is that segmentation assesses your entire database. So everyone in your database is in one of these segments, but every single person in your database can only be in one segment at a time. And it's based on a hierarchy that you're identifying when you build the segmentation. So you can see this is the hierarchy of the segments in our nurture segmentation that's powered by Traffic Director. And the highest level segments that we have here, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 segments, are actually not aligned with a nurture at all. These are all people that we're intentionally excluding from nurture entirely. So we don't want these people to be in any nurture program, even if they were to qualify for it. And the nice thing about doing it this way is you can easily see who is just don't have a good fit nurture for them right now. After my clients have Traffic Director totally built out and all of the nurtures in their instance are folded into this, the first thing I like to do is do an analysis of this default segment and say, okay, so we have X number of people that are in default right now. There's no reason that we can identify that we're not nurturing them. and they're not qualifying for nurture right now. So let's see if that's an audience that we haven't quite identified a good nurture for yet. If we can either expand our audience criteria for an existing nurture, or if we've identified an opportunity to create a new nurture. The other nice thing about using these holdout groups is if someone is being excluded from nurture for a reason that could change. So for example, if you have an NQL holdout group, that's one that I see pretty commonly with my clients. If you're not nurturing people right now because they've hit MQL and that's your goal for most of your demand gen nurtures is to be able to pass those people over to sales, they can pop into that MQL segment. They'll stay there for the duration of the time that they are in MQL, and then they'll automatically move back down to the most appropriate nurture segment or the highest hierarchical nurture segment that they're a fit for when they're no longer at MQL and they're ready to resume nurture. Similarly, if someone is non-marketable, so let's say maybe they were flagged as an invalid email because they bounced, and then your salesperson said, oh, that was because I accidentally put a comma instead of a period when I typed in their email address, or maybe they did when they filled out a form and now it's been corrected. Or maybe they're in a GDPR country and they didn't opt in when they filled out their first form, but they've downloaded more content from you since then. Then have since decided, oh, okay, I'll give these guys a shot. I'll go ahead and opt in. Now they're going to drop down from that non-marketable segment, and they'll immediately go into the segment that aligns with the nurture that they're a fit for at that time. So there's no, reprocessing of your database, no additional triggers you have to build. The segmentation will handle all of that totally automatically. Also, always a good idea to hold out your employees, competitors certainly, but employees and partners from your nurture, just to make sure you're not diluting your nurture reporting with people who are unlikely to engage with your content, or their engagement is not super valuable to you. Okay. So we mentioned that pass off or the handoff from the traffic director program that's managing all those static lists. So I'll just reiterate again that those static lists that are created in that program are all referenced at the segment level of the nurtures that they align with. That's the only rule in the segment, it's just that they're a member of that static list. So the static list is powering the segmentation. The segmentation is in turn powering the engagement program itself. So we'll jump into Marketo in just a moment and look at this, but how this works at a high level is in your add to nurture campaign, you're no longer building your audience criteria in any engagement program. Every single add to nurture, pause nurture, resume nurture campaign will look identical regardless of what the engagement program is, with the exception of the segment that you're referencing. So we're adding people to a nurture if their segment changes and their new segment is the segment aligned with this nurture. We're pausing them if their segment changes and their new segment is not the one that's aligned with this nurture. Okay, and I mentioned that we would take this one step further. I'm just going to go ahead and walk through this quickly now, and then we'll walk through it more in depth in Marketo itself. But after you have now spent all this time building out all of these nurtures, identifying your evergreen content, maybe even having some more content produced, certainly invested some marketing budget, definitely invested in some marketing time, and now you've invested additional marketing time or mox time into building out Traffic Director, you're in a really great place. You have all of these nurtures running. The first thing that your executive team is going to ask you is, how do we know that this is working? Or how will we know that this is working? Why did we dump so much time and budget into this, and now you can't tell me if it's working or not? We can tell you if it's going to work or not, and we can do it with science, do it with numbers and proof, instead of saying, no, it looks like it's working, we think it's working, marketing still generated the right number of MQLs, la, 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 la. So what we're going to do is scientifically prove the effectiveness of your nurture by using a control group. You may remember back to 3rd grade science when you learned about the scientific method, the concept of a control group and a hypothesis. So your hypothesis here is that persons who are being nurtured by this nurture that we've run will move through the buyer's journey, will make it to MQL more quickly than those persons who are not nurtured at all. So what you'll do is identify what percentage of your nurture audience do you want to use for your control group. Science, I believe, tells us, statistics tells us that 20% is a statistically significant sample size. If you're a little more risk averse, you may do something a little bit smaller, like 10%.
We're going to pause for a brief moment to allow Sydney to step away and answer her phone or the door. Here she comes.
Yeah. Gotta love my work from home life. That was just the FedEx man. but don't worry, he's here delivering packages now. Okay, so back to statistics. So if you select your statistically significant sample size of 20%, or if you do something a little more conservative like 10%, I would say that's fine. I wouldn't do anything smaller than 10%. Definitely be conscientious of the total size of your nurture audience. If it's really small, you definitely want to do at least 10%. I'm talking if it's a couple hundred people in total are going to qualify for this nurture. That may not even be a big enough group to do a test like this. I would say it needs to be at least several thousand in order for this to be effective, in order for it to work. But what you'll do is, after having this nurture run for several casts, you have your your nurture control group will be totally paused from the nurture. So if we go back to Traffic Director and look at how this works, because this person is now in the segment for this nurture, they won't be added to any other nurture. And because they're in your nurture control group, they're going to be paused in the only nurture that we're allowing them to qualify for. So they will be not nurtured at all. They certainly could qualify for other, one-off demand gen emails that you're sending, and that's totally fine. That's not really what we're evaluating the effectiveness of here. After you allow this nurture to run for a certain number of casts, I would give it, probably at least a good 4 or 5 casts. If you're casting weekly, I would say, at least a month of having these people held out entirely. Also be very conscientious of what you're buying, the length of your buying cycle is here. If you have a particularly long buying cycle, I would maybe even let this go longer if you can. And then what you'll do is compare the life cycle status of the people that were in your control group, the people who were not nurtured, to the people who were nurtured. Again, to test that against your hypothesis, which was people who are nurtured will move through the buyer's journey more quickly than people who are not nurtured at all. All right, and then Amanda touched on this briefly, and we'll go into it a little more in depth once we jump into Marketo. But the other thing that using those nested default programs rather than the direct email cast gives you the ability to do is A/B testing. So if you're getting to the point of certainly testing the effectiveness of a nurture overall, excuse me, you're probably also wanting to test the effectiveness of individual emails. I think A/B testing is one of those things that gets thrown around quite a lot as we have to A/B test. A/B testing is super important, and I totally agree. But it's only important if you're doing it effectively, if you're doing it in a way that you're testing against a hypothesis and know what your success metrics will be, and that you're testing this for long enough that your results are statistically significant. So, doing a one-off, we sent subject A to 10% of our database and then subject B to another 10%, and whatever the winner was, that's what we'll do. Or even, sending an email and never really looking at the results. That's just a waste of time. That's A/B testing for the sake of A/B testing. What we're doing here is using that random sample again. And if you've never used the random sample flow step in Marketo, this is totally out of the box. This is not something you have to set up. If you just type random sample in a choice in a flow step, it comes up, and then you're selecting the percentage here. Use that random sample to send half of the people in this group version B of the email, and then make your default choice version A. I will say that if you do, it's important to have a default choice to make sure that every single person gets an email. But again, I would let this test run for a certain number of casts, at least 4 or 5 casts, depending on the volume of your kind of cohorts that are flowing through this. Make sure that you have at least several thousand people that have received this email before you quote unquote declare a winner. And again, because this is not the out of the box A/B testing from Marketo, this is not Champion Challenger. There's nowhere for you to, press a button and officially declare a winner. You're just going to look at your email performance report. Whatever your success metric was, whether it was email opens, which I wouldn't totally recommend, email clicks, or more likely is content engagement in the response to the emails. Declare a winner for yourself, give yourself a pat on the back, and then just kill the choice for whichever one did not win. And you no longer have to send that email. Everyone else will get the winner going forward. So at this point, let's go ahead and jump into Marketo. Bear with me just a moment. Okay. So the first thing, we're just going to start back from the top. So we went through this at a high level, and I'm just going to reiterate this going through Marketo itself. The first thing we talked about was Traffic Director as the operational program. I will just give a quick caveat here to say that Traffic Director is an operational program that we consider to be a module that you add on to lifecycle processing. Lifecycle processing is what we consider, and it's become almost hokey at this point, the operational spine of Marketo. So essentially what that means is, everyone, quote, or more or less everyone, most people have at least heard of having a life cycle or having a revenue cycle or having a buyer's journey or a lead funnel. There are lots of different words you can use for it. The way we think about it that's a little bit different is we're not just tracking movement through the buyer's journey, although we're definitely doing that, and that's very important. We're also plugging in all of the operational processes that happen in our instance to this one centralized program. So we actually call Traffic Director from what we call original processing, which is where the only lead is created trigger lives in our entire database. So there's only one campaign that is triggered automatically when a new lead comes into our system, and that campaign handles what needs to happen as that lead is created based on what we know about them at that time. So one of the things we'll do is call Traffic Director and evaluate their fitness for nurture as they've entered our database. So you can see here we have this lifecycle processing requested. This is just a simple campaign is requested trigger. If you know anything about Atumos or have been following us for any amount of time, you know that we're big fans of request campaigns and happy to fight that one out with anyone any day, but I'm a big request campaign fan. You can also, if you don't have lifecycle processing or if that's not something you want to do, just put a lead as created trigger here too, and that's fine. What our flow is doing is just requesting our master switch. And then I also mentioned this subscription campaign that's reevaluating your fitness for nurture at certain points throughout your buyer's journey, or when we learn new things about you, engage with different content. I think I mentioned that ours is based on engagement with our subscription center if you opt in to receiving nurture emails. And this is just doing the exact same thing, which is requesting that master switch. So the master switch is looking at the smart list criteria that's built out down here. So each nurture that we have I think 3 nurtures running in here, and then there's a placeholder for a 4th. Each nurture has its own smart list and then its own folder with its own series of static lists and smart campaigns. This is what's managing the audiences, and this is where you define your audience criteria. So for example, for our Mal Discovery Track nurture, we're just looking at people that have opted into nurture and their lifecycle status is Mal. This is kind of what we would consider our default nurture. I really encourage people when you're developing a nurture strategy to have this concept of a quote unquote default nurture, that, if you have your more targeted nurtures, things that are some of the things Amanda was talking about really related to job function or your industry or really specific pieces of information that we know about you. If you have people that are coming into your database that don't have that information, we don't really want them to just not be nurtured, because it's unlikely we'll ever learn that information about them if we're not giving them opportunities to share it. So our Mal Discovery Track is kind of that, serves that purpose for us. If we don't know that you're a customer, we don't know that you are a key buying prospect, then you'll become part of our Mal Discovery Track and get more general content until we learn more about you. So inside our master switch, we're again just looking at the membership of those smart lists, and then calling this add resume nurture campaign. So each of these, as I mentioned, has their own series of campaigns and lists that are being requested out from the master switch. You'll also notice, again, that these are separate flow steps, which means that if you're a member of more than one of these smart lists, you will qualify for every single one of these add resume nurture campaigns that you are a good fit for. And remember that our segmentation is handling, making sure that you don't truly end up in more than one at a time. So our add resume nurture campaign, again, is just listening to be called from that master switch. Master switch can be called either from lead is created or from your reprocessing campaign. We're just doing an extra safety check here to make sure that you are in the target audience smart list for this nurture. You are not already in our active nurture static list, and you're not in permanently paused. So permanently paused is how we're handling that content exhaustion. If you run completely out of content, then we have a recurring batch campaign that's listening every week before the nurture casts to say, if you are currently exhausted in this nurture, your cadence is still normal, or you're still part of the active nurture list rather, let's take you off of the active nurture list and add you to permanently removed. What this does is taking you off of active nurture obviously moves you out of the segment for that nurture, so you're able to qualify for a different segment. Adding you to permanently removed blocks you from re-qualifying for this campaign ever. So if you reprocess through the master switch, you still have that same criteria that got you into this nurture in the first place. You may have that add resume nurture campaign called, but it wouldn't actually execute on adding you to the nurture again because we're blocking you with pause permanently. Since there's nothing else for you to receive, it's not worth adding you back to the nurture. You'll be trapped again. And if we jump into our nurture segmentation here, remember we talked about the hierarchy. So we have non-marketable at the very top. This is things like unsubscribed or hasn't opted in, marketing suspended, email invalid, all of your static, kind of non-marketable things. Obviously for those system fields, Marketo is blocking you from receiving emails by default. But this gives us the ability to know that someone is not being nurtured and know why they're not being nurtured without just letting them, live in an engagement program and us maybe think that they are receiving emails when they're not. Our other holdout segments are embargoed. So if there are countries that you can't do business with, that's a good way to hold them out. Competitors, obviously, you don't want to share your content with competitors. Your partners, employees, people that would just kind of dilute the success metrics of your nurture or maybe falsely inflate them if they're engaging with it quite a bit, but they're not actually someone who can buy from you. People who are not subscribed. So again, that's part of our subscription center. You have to opt in to receive our nurture emails. If you're not opted in, then we won't add you to a nurture. And then people who are part of the global customer nurture, this is just referencing the static list from Traffic Director, Prospect Nurture, same thing, and then Mal Discovery Track. So Mal Discovery Track is the one that we'll jump into. Amanda shared briefly about it earlier. This is our Mal Discovery Track nurture. And remember I mentioned that every add to nurture and pause nurture campaign looks exactly the same for every engagement program in our instance with the exception of which segment they're referencing. So adding people to a nurture, we're just listening for this segment change, and their new segment is the one that aligns with this nurture, which is Mal Discovery Track. And we're just making sure they're not already a member of the program. We're actually tracking that separately by looking at in a resume nurture campaign, people who are already a member of the program but are paused, and they're not paused because they're part of our nurture control group. So this will allow us to just change their cadence back to normal and have them pick up where they left off instead of trying to add them back to the very beginning of the nurture. And then pause nurture is just looking at if your segment changes and it is now not the segment that's aligned with this. So if you either qualified for a more highly prioritized nurture, you stopped meeting the qualification for this nurture, or if you now became a member of one of those exclusion segments, maybe you became an MQL, maybe we learned that you were secretly a competitor, maybe you unsubscribed entirely, we'll go ahead and pause you from this nurture. And inside our add to nurture campaign, we can go ahead and talk about the nurture control group. So remember we talked about using that random sample to hold out a statistically significant sample size of people as your nurture control group, and you're just going to pause them. So as they've now qualified, we're immediately going to say, for 20% of you, we want to immediately pull you off and pause you. And we have a dedicated campaign right here for that pause nurture control group. This also makes it really easy to stop using this when you're ready to stop running the test. You can simply, kill that flow step or deactivate this campaign, or probably do both. And there are also two ways you can start a nurture control group. If you're doing a kind of big nurture launch all at once and you're about to dump a whole bunch of people into this program, I would probably wait, let all those people be added, look at how big the audience actually ended up being, and then decide what your percentage should be, and just run a quick batch campaign to pull out a certain percentage of those people. You can still use that random sample, but I would just pull it out in a separate campaign and do it as a batch. All you really need to do is change their cadence to pause and add them to this static list for nurture control group. The static list is important, one, so you can identify who your control group was, who qualified for this nurture that were by design not nurturing, so you can look at your results, and two, so you can make sure they don't ever get added back to the nurture if they do something to requalify. So that's how the nurture control group works. And then let's jump into the A/B test. So Amanda mentioned all the perks of using a default program rather than nesting an email directly into a nurture stream. I think this is another one of those things that a lot of people know in theory that you can do, but feels a little boogeyman-like, because everyone hears about this way that you can accidentally trap people in an infinite loop. It is easy to not trap people in an infinite loop. Let me tell you how that might happen. So remember, the nurture is casting anytime it's casting the next program that this lead is not already a member of. It doesn't really care what happens in the nurture cast or what happens when it requests the smart campaign. All it cares is that this person's not already a member of the program. If you have something in your smart list here that would block someone from actually qualifying for the smart campaign after they've casted, that is how you get stuck in an infinite loop, because every single week they are going to not be a member of this program yet. The nurture is going to cast out this smart campaign, and every time they're going to be blocked from it because of some criteria that you've added. So it's not necessary to have any criteria in here to try to filter people out or to do like an extra check. Like I've seen people put, unsubscribed is false. If someone's unsubscribed, then they should no longer be in the nurture. They should have been pulled out by your holdout segmentation. And you're just wasting processing power, really, by having them infinitely running through this campaign. So what I like to put in here is just member of engagement program is true, program is any. That means that you don't have to limit it to just the program that you're casting from in case you decide to reuse this program in multiple nurtures, which I would definitely encourage you doing. This is how people do not get stuck in an infinite loop. So just want to make a quick note on that. And then our A/B test, again, is just this random sample filter. Again, if you haven't used random sample before, highly recommend it. It's a very underutilized tool and a great way to kind of apply math, which everyone thought they would not have to use when they were grown-ups, but here we are, math and statistics to your actual marketing activities. So we're doing a 50% random sample, sending version B of the email. Everyone else gets version A. I would allow this to run for at least 4 or 5 casts, at least a month, or as long as it takes to get several thousand people have qualified for this with the test. Look at your email performance, look at the performance of the actual downloads of this content for the people who received email A versus email B. Declare a winner that way. Remember to define a hypothesis at the beginning of the test for how you'll know what was successful. And then you'll just remove whichever one did not win, whether that was version B or version A. You'll just keep the one that was the winner. So that is how we're energizing our nurture strategy. I'm actually going to pass it back to Nicole now for questions. Nicole, did we get any good questions that we can talk about?
We did indeed. Thank you guys so much for that awesome presentation. Let me pull up the module here. First question, Sydney, is for you. And it is, what is the best way to start building out segmentations? Where should we start if we don't have any set up?
That's a great question. So the first thing I would say is don't feel like you have to build segmentations just for the sake of having a segmentation, just to say that you have a segmentation. That is a really great way to build a lot that are not necessary, that you will regret later after you've defined a really good use case for having some and you've already hit your limit. I would say that if you have something that is a highly prioritized activity in Marketo, so Marketo has all these different rules kind of under the hood for how quickly something happens. You may notice, in a smart list, for example, that it gets cached, has that little yellow sticky on it after you've run it a couple of times because they're just not highly prioritizing rerunning that smart list criteria often. So if you have something that's really, really important that you need to know, on a timely basis, has been updated, a segmentation is a good use case for that. Or if you have a need to trigger off of the change in criteria, a segmentation is a good use case for that. That's another reason that we like using it for Traffic Director, because you can trigger those segment changes. Not good use cases for segmentations are something that could really be used with a smart list. If you're just using this for targeting, probably not a great use case for a segmentation. If this is something that's not used frequently, probably not a good use case for a segmentation. If it's something you're not likely to need long-term, not a good use case for a segmentation. Totally depends on your business, but some of the good segmentations that I've seen are like a marketability segmentation. You'll use that in every single email send. It's really nice if you end up having kind of complex criteria that changes over time and how you want to target your audience. If, for example, there's a specific subset of your customer base that you only want to receive this one type of marketing campaign, you can easily create another segment to pull them out of your general marketable segment. Your campaign team is already used to building that into their smart list criteria. There's no big communication, pretty small margin for error. That's a pretty good use case for segmentation. And then any operational program like Traffic Director, I think, is a good use case for segmentation if you don't need people to be in more than one segment at a time.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Next question. This is for Amanda. And I think, Amanda, you had a slide actually that touches on this. So you could maybe share that also. But the question is, what is the primary purpose for making each email a default program in the stream? What are the key things this allows you to do instead of just using an email?
Yeah, so I think Sydney's going to pull up the slide. Thank you. And good question. The main purpose of using default programs is that it allows for the skip logic to happen. Using default programs within a stream as content, Marketo is trying to make the leads within that program or within the engagement program a member of that default program. So if you are beating Marketo to the punch pretty much by making a person a member of that program and by making their member status excluded, Marketo, when it runs its cadence and calls on that piece of content, will see that that person is already a member and will then skip them from receiving that email, from becoming a member again and triggering the email to be sent. So the biggest, I guess, the main purpose here is that it allows people to skip, and so you are not sending them content that they've already interacted with before and not wasting their time. You're remaining relevant and you're getting them to interact with something new and continue their journey. It also allows, like Sydney provided like an amazing example with that, the A/B testing. So using random samples and allowing you to get more out of that. And you can also get a lot more definitive reporting out of this by using default programs, because you can, if you wanted to, get very detailed with individual program success. So if you want to, you have like your member status for the engagement program, but you can have member statuses for each individual specific program, and then get even more, definitive, detailed reporting out of your nurture streams. Yeah, the other ones are tokens. That's a plus. And switching out emails without interrupting the flow. So I've been in this situation where I've gotten new templates, from creative, and you have to like redo all of your emails and then re-put them back into the stream, and then it interrupts them. Yeah, in this visual, you can see it's going to interrupt email. It has to be very like the unique ID for it to actually skip and not receive the email again. And if you're in a program, you're changing their membership, it's going to ask the question again. That stream is going to push them into the next cadence. So it's really all about the skip logic. That's the number one reason why you should use default programs.
Yeah, I'll also say that if you feel like this is, beyond what you need now, it can be tempting to say like, oh, well, my nurture's not that complicated. I'd rather just build it as emails. Our architecting philosophy here at Tumos, you may have heard of before, is called SCRIM. It's a fun little acronym, which the first letter is S, which stands for scalable. So even if this is something that you don't think you need today, it is something that you will really hate yourself for not building 6 months from now when you get a new email template, or you have some new complex criteria. It's better to overbuild now what you don't think you need than regret not having it later when you actually do need it. And I will say that you will likely end up wishing that you had this at some point in time. If for no other reason, then you can clone out those default programs and have them be fully tokenized. That will drastically decrease the amount of time it takes you to launch this nurture in the first place.
Awesome. Thanks to you both. A few more questions here. This next question is for Sydney. Do you have to batch members into the nurture if you are using programs with a smart campaign?
Do you have to batch members into the nurture if you're using programs with a smart campaign?
So I think potentially the question is trying to look at how we're specifically adding people, maybe how to start the traffic director and how to specifically add people to from a retroactive perspective. I'm also
Okay.
little confused about the question also, but I think that's what we're asking here.
I think that you're right about the retroactive traffic director. So the first time that you launch traffic director, obviously you want this to apply to your existing database, not just the people who are being created on an ongoing basis or the people whose criteria changes to reevaluate them. You would, just as when you launch really any operational program, you will need to run some batch campaigns to retroactively process everyone to the database. All you really need to do is look at people who qualify for any of those smart lists that you've identified for your audience, and then request that master switch. As a best practice for doing any type of batching, particularly if you are syncing your nurture programs to Salesforce campaigns, because you don't want to blow out your Salesforce API calls or create a huge, massive backlog on that. I would do them in batches of 50 to 100K, start small and then kind of work your way up after you see how quickly they process through, and make sure you're not creating a huge backlog on your Salesforce sync. But just break them out by, I usually start with people who are created most recently and then work back to the oldest people, because they're usually the not quite as valuable ones, and run them through that master switch campaign. But yes, you do need to do that when you launch Traffic Director. And if the question was about the default programs in the nurture, that does not have any impact on whether or not you need to batch people through the first time when you launch it.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. There's a few more on here. If we don't get to your questions, we will certainly follow up with you after the webinar to make sure that we've responded to them. But we'll do one final question here. And this one is for Amanda. The transition to Accelerated had just one email. Would you add all of the cast emails and CTAs to track all engagements to move to Accelerated?
Yeah, so I would set it up to where it's under each individual program. So yes, it looks like it has one email in there, but it's actually working for each email. So having it under each individual program will allow you to measure the interaction with that specific email. So transition rules, like at the top here with in between the actual streams, is looking at interactions that are like within the stream itself. If you list out each individual email, you wouldn't want to do that within the transition rule that they could have done this or this or this, because it's time sensitive as to when they're interacting with those specific emails. So did they receive the email in the last 6 days, and did they actually interact with them in the last 24 hours? So that gives them, time. They received the email 5 days ago, they just opened it today and they're interacting with it, right? So they should get into Accelerated. So this is why you would have the actual transition campaigns within each default program. And I hope that answered your question. And if it didn't, just enter into the chat box or just reach out to me and I can explain it further.
Awesome. Well, we are at the top of the hour. I want to be conscientious of everyone's schedules and days. So thank you all for joining. As I said before, we'll have the recording and the slides. We'll send those out to you so you can reference them in the future. Please fill out the exit survey as you depart here today. And we look forward to having you at a future Atumos webinar. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much.